Today we're looking at a story in Genesis, a kind of disturbing story, not many people's favorite story. It's certainly one of those stories that you read in the Bible and say, well, I don't get it, let's move on, and don't talk about the meaning or the depth of the story, but it's a very important story to our faith. It's a story about Abraham. And if you remember about Abraham, he is the father of our religious heritage. When God chose to make a covenant with humanity, God chose Abraham, and then our relationship with God, just as we know it, just went from there. It began. But it all began with a covenant, a very, very, very important covenant, a covenant that still holds true some 4,000 years later. Again, it's a simple covenant. Everything about our relationship with God is simple. And the covenant is this: I will be your only God, and you will be my only people. How's that? Not too shabby, is it? And the promise is this: as long as we live up to that covenant with God, then there is a promise. The promise is that we will live fruitful, productive, fulfilling lives, and all of our needs will be cared for. Now, this sounds so simple, and how simple it is, we never in 4,000 years could ever believe just how stinking difficult it is, right? And the reason I think it's so difficult, because God, I think, didn't do the right thing. He gave us the ability to choose. Now, we wouldn't have it any other way, right? That's just the way we are. We want God to be in control, right, of other people, just not us, right? We want God to be in control of events that don't affect us, but leave us alone, right? That's kind of how human nature tends to be. And so God gives us the ability to choose. And I'm really not quite sure that was too wise of God, because we do know how we are. We get so incredibly distracted in a world of choices that if we are not disciplined enough, then we usually make the choice that benefits who? Man, y'all are right on this story. Y'all must know the struggles of our faith. You know, sometimes I feel like we're the kid on this series that Monty Hall did. You remember Monty Hall? Yeah, okay, y'all are old enough. And it must have been, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago I was watching this. I don't even know what one he was doing. But I remember it very, very, very suddenly. And he grabs his family. It's a mom and a dad and like a 5, 6, 7-year-old boy. And they go up to this stage, and he opens up the curtain, right? And on the curtain is things that you want to see. Great smorgasbord of stuff. Appliances of every kind. Had a hot tub I've been asking for this church for 20 years and never got. It had like a vacation package to Europe, 14 days. You know, it had all these great things, and the parents are going, oh my goodness. And they said, we will let your child go up there, and for 1 minute, he could choose 3 things that he wants. And so the parents are excited, but they can't coach the kid. That's the deal, right? He has the freedom to choose, right? And so what they see is not what the parents see, right? That's kind of how it works in our relationship with God. What God sees is not what we see. So the kid rushes up on stage, and the first thing he goes is straight to the dryer, and on top of the dryer is a remote control car. Then he runs over the hot tub and pulls out a box of candy, right? And then he goes to the vacation package, and there it was, these cool games. And those are the 3 things he chose. His parents sat there, what is he doing? They're screaming, hollering. They can't coach. They're about to die because of the choices that is made. I kind of feel like that's how we are and how God sees us, right? That God sees something that we don't see. You know, in the stage of life, there's this curtain that opens up, right? And it's just chock full of all sorts of abuse, of misuse of power, of homelessness, of division, of people living in the streets, mismanaging money, mismanaging life, lack of responsibility, parents not parenting, children living in the streets. 2/3 of the world have to drink their own sewage just to survive. 90% of our population have no idea who Christ is, and even more of that have no idea what Christ can do for them in their life. and we walk around in this grand stage of life with all of these things that are catching on. And what catches our attention? What do we invest in? So why did God give us choices? Why? I mean, the things that I can create on my own, the things that I can own, the things I can accomplish, the wisdom that I can accrue, the power that I can have over others, the things that I can build, we simply forget that all of our obsessions are only made possible by using the very resources that God gave us. But we take them in as if they were our own. And before we even know it, we start to create our own little kingdom, right? Our own Tower of Babel. And as quiet as a cancer grows, the things that we create begin to replace God as our only God, as our most important entity in our lives. Our covenant with God is so important to our role as God's children. How important? Listen to the story. After these things, God tested Abraham. And God said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. I want you to take your son, your only son, Isaac, to whom you love, and I want you to go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I will show you. So Abraham rose early in the morning. He saddled his donkey. He took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. He cut the wood for the burnt offering. And he set out and he went to the place in the distant land that God had shown him. And when they came to the place that God had shown him, Abraham built an altar there. He laid the wood in order. And he bound his son Isaac. And he laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand, and he took out his knife to kill his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. That story we just read, I'm not going to lie to you, I've always hated that story. Never understood it. Thought it was very cruel, a demeaning story. Struggled with it, especially when I start having children, that you read this story and you're just overcome with emotions when you read it. And just knowing that how could God ask Abraham to take something as innocent and beautiful as a newborn and ask him to do what he asked him to do. And I just would avoid the story. And I always, every time I read it, I'd even get moved to tears reading it at times. And if I think too much about it, could probably do it pretty quickly too. But really as I struggled for all of my adult life with this story, and as time continued to move on, I began to really understand the bigger picture of what this story represents and how important this story really is to the faith that we affirm, even within the Church of Jesus Christ, how important it is. And it all goes back to me, to our side of the covenant that we had established with God from the very beginning. The covenant that we said that God said with Abraham said this, that you will be my people. You will be my people. We are God's people. What does it mean to be God's people? What are the implications of being God's people? What's the expectations of being a people of God? That's just not a name tag that we wear to go out anywhere we want to go and do whatever we want to do. Because God here in this story was really setting a precedent for our relationship with God and was using Abraham as an example from the very beginning of how we are to live out our lives. And so terms for this relationship had to be established, and God was not going to allow us to establish that relationship. God was going to have to be the one who set the parameters. And so God said, I will put you first. You will put me first. And if we do this together, I promise you, you will be well cared for. This is the promise that God made with us. And then it happened. The greatest test of all. Human beings create human beings. All of a sudden, I am the creator, right? Wow, I'm the creator. That's a great feeling. Because I think every one of us that really understands and knows the overwhelming rush of emotions, really understand the depth of love that really takes us when someone is born from us, and how difficult it is to make our creation the most important entity of our lives. Isn't it? But what about this other covenant that we made with God that says God will be number one? And so God set out to see where God's loyalty, or where Abraham's loyalty lies. Were they going to be with his son, or would God remain to be number one? We see how the story ends. And so God sets an example through Abraham for us to follow. The importance of keeping God number one. Now, throughout this sermon series, I've kind of showed a lot of different simple truths that kind of reveal who God is, that really come out of this covenant that God has made through us. And so the first truth that we looked at probably about a month ago was the words of Jesus when Jesus said to the people, "Give to the emperor what is the emperor's, and to God what is God's." What I've always liked about this statement is that there's only two worlds that we get to choose to live in, right? There's two choices on the menus for anybody to choose, right? There's the world in which we are born into, and then there's God's kingdom. There's God's world. There's only two options that we have there, and so we have to choose one or the other. And if we choose to be a people of God, then we are choosing to live under God's rules, under God's reign. We belong to God's kingdom, right? That is what we do. That is who we are. We choose to live in God's kingdom. That means that we are owned, that we are claimed by God. So, everything that we have in this life, everything that we are, everything that we are capable of being, all that we have made, all that we have possessed in our lives is made possible because of God's infinite wisdom, God's gifts for us, and God's grace. You see, God responded favorably to Abraham because Abraham knew the importance of that covenant with God. He trusted God's promise to him. And Abraham made his covenant to God the very core, number one value in his life, that I will be your child, and you will be my number one. Even as much as Abraham loved and cherished and was emotionally attached to Isaac, Abraham understood Isaac did not belong to him. Isaac belonged to God. And by demonstrating that with his life, put him in a very right relationship with God. And God's response to him was this: now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Is there a word up there that kind of bothers you a little bit? We've heard our entire lives. It's the word fear. Does that sound a good relationship, to be in a relationship with someone that you fear? I feared my dad when my dad was not in the right place. I feared my mother when she had been drinking. So it's important for us not to think in context of what that word means and how we relate to it, because fear has nothing to do with the word afraid. Fear is an acknowledgement that God is the beginning and God is the end, that God is all-powerful, that God is all-knowing, that God is the first word that was ever spoken and God is the last word that we will ever hear. Fear is reverence. Fear is the ultimate respect. Fear is bowing down in acknowledgement, bowing down in awe, bowing down in wonder as to why this God chose to reach down and to interact with us human beings. And so an appropriate response to God, as same response that Abraham gave, is not to withhold anything from God. It's to acknowledge that all things belong to God. To put God first, and to give God our first, and to give God our best. That reflects our trust in God to fulfill God's promise to us that we shall be cared for. So a appropriate response to our God is similar to Abraham's, to give God the first of our day, to acknowledge our Creator who made that day. To give God the first of our income, just to acknowledge our faithfulness to God. To give God the first day of our week, to show God's worthiness in our lives, is to give God our first, not our last. Not what's left over, but our first, our best. You see, the Church of Jesus Christ is fulfilling our part in the covenant that we have made with God. And when we invest our lives in Christ's church, we are responding to God with our first and with our best. We are taking our place in building God's kingdom. We are demonstrating our trust in God's ability to lead us to the place that we want to be most. A place where we're fruitful and productive and live fulfilling lives. That is God's promise to us. But that requires our effort, our best effort, our desire to uphold our end of the covenant. Take some time to answer those questions that are on there. And when we're empty and finished, we'll bring them forward and place them on the table as we gather for communion.